Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Mark Millick here with the Moral Medicine YouTube channel. So the following interview you're about to watch is going to be with Derek Blumke. Derek is a 12-year veteran of the United States Air Force, the Veteran Impact Fellow for the Grunt Style Foundation, and also somebody who was prescribed finasteride by the VA and suffered with the severe cognitive effects for several years after taking it. So I want to talk briefly about who Derek is, talk about the Grunt Style Foundation, and talk about Grunt Style as well. So anybody that's served in the U.S. Armed Forces is probably very familiar with Grunt Style, especially those that served in the infantry. Grunt Style is a veteran-owned company, probably one of the largest and most powerful veteran-owned companies in the United States. They sell military apparel, things like T-shirts, hoodies, things like that. You can typically recognize their logo. They have the cross rifles in the sleeves and also the assaulting flag as well. So as a lot of you guys know, I served in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard for 8 years. I was a 25 uniform signal support system specialist. I was attached to an infantry unit for about 4 years. So I used to wear Grunt Style a lot when I was in. To really have any affiliation with Grunt Style and the Grunt Style Foundation is quite the honor for me. It was really an honor to interview Derek and to hear about his story and hear about his role with the Grunt Style Foundation and what their mission is. So having said that, I do want to briefly read through Derek's bio real quick and talk about who he is. So Derek is a writer, consultant, and advocate with a focus on mental health reform as it relates to the epidemic of overprescribing in the United States, specifically of those who wear and wore the uniform of our armed forces. Derek served 12 years in the United States Air Force and Michigan Air National Guard. During this time, he deployed 3 times with AC-138 Spectra gunships as part of the 16th Special Operations Wing. In 2008, Derek co-founded Student Veterans of America, or SVA. During this time with SVA, he served as the organization's first president and also served as the organization's executive director, where he led the organization's advocacy efforts to help pass the Post-9/11 GI Bill through Congress. Today, SVA is now the largest community-based organization of post-9/11 veterans in the country, hosting chapters on over 1,600 campuses globally. Derek was a startup technology entrepreneur in New York City, served as the founding director of the Department of Veterans Affairs National Mental Health Program. The VITAL initiative, was a co-founding committee member of the National Action Alliance on Suicide Prevention, a member of the American Legion's National Centennial Committee, and was the editor of Veterans and Military Families for the mental health website Mad in America. Most recently, Derek served as the Chief Operations and Financial Officer for the Veterans of Foreign Wars Department of Michigan. For his work, Derek has received the Presidential Volunteer Service Award and was recognized at the White House by President Barack Obama for his leadership in supporting returning military veterans. Derek is a graduate of the University of Michigan, where he double majored in psychology and political science. He is currently writing the memoir as he pursues the MFA in creative nonfiction writing of Alma College. So he's obviously a very high-speed individual. Again, it was really an honor to have featured him on this channel and to have done this interview. So let me talk briefly about the Grunt Style Foundation and what their mission is and what Derek's role is with that. So Grunt Style Foundation, established in April of 2021, Grunt Style Foundation is a national nonprofit organization committed to providing life-changing resources and experiences for service members, veterans, and their families. With a steadfast commitment to its core values, mental health and wellness, transition and sustainment, food insecurities, and homelessness, Grunt Style Foundation offers those who served and continue to serve our country their due recognition, honor, and support. So look, obviously I love the mission here. As you guys know, I come from a pretty extensive military background. You know, my stepfather was in the active duty Army for 24 years. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. He was an officer, worked in the electronic warfare division at the Pentagon. So I really stand by this mission. I stand by supporting our veterans. And this really ties into a lot of what we talk about here on this channel as well, obviously. You know, the overprescription of drugs and how easily accessible these drugs are, whether it's finasteride or SSRIs. So let me just read through Derek's very particular role at the Grunt Style Foundation. So Derek Blumke is the Grunt Style Foundation's Veteran Impact Fellow. Derek is an advocate, writer, and public speaker. His work focuses on reforming prescribing practices at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and in the epidemic of overprescribing in the United States, specifically to those who wear and wore the uniform of our armed forces, and towards restructuring mental health programming and delivery for all Americans. So again, guys, I can't emphasize enough what an honor it was to interview Derek, and I think it's amazing that we have somebody of this caliber featured on this channel. So having said that, without further ado, here is Derek Blumke's interview. Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Mark Millick here with the Moral Medicine YouTube channel. So today we are going to be interviewing Derek Blumke. So Derek Blumke is with the Grunt Style Foundation. Anybody who served in the military is probably at least familiar with Grunt Style. They are a veteran-owned company that sells military apparel. The Grunt Style Foundation has some few different missions, though. So Derek is going to be here to tell his story about finasteride, what he went through, and a few other drugs he was taking at the time. So, Derek, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Absolutely, Mark. Great to meet you. Been awesome talking over the past several months. So thanks a lot for everything you're doing.
Absolutely, man. We really appreciate you coming on. So, Derek, real quick, man. So you are the Veteran Impact Fellow for the Grunt Style Foundation. Do you mind just giving kind of a quick rundown on what the mission is and what your role is with that?
Sure. So I got brought on board with the Grunt Style Foundation back in January. Met Will Wisner, the executive director, a few months earlier. He introduced me to Tim Jensen, the co-owner of Grunt Style, the company, also the president of the foundation. We basically had this really exciting conversation because when I first met Will, we started talking about the work that I've been doing for the past several years, which is looking at medications, specifically psychiatric drugs, and the role and harm to the veterans community, suicides, violence, protracted withdrawal, all kinds of other crazy side effects. So shared some of the work that I've been doing with them, and they were already working towards this larger issue of mental health reform, alternative modalities, big into psychedelics, expanding different options for vets, whether it's equine therapy, hiking therapy, you want to call it, you can call it some of this stuff too, especially when I'm bumbling. That's good.
Sure.
Thanks.
All good.
So their big focus is really changing the paradigm of mental health care in this country, specifically with the veterans and first responder communities. So when I shared with them the work that I've been doing, looking at the role of medication, specifically antidepressants and other psychiatric drugs and the harm, they were kind of blown away. And we seemed to kind of fallen into a group of fast friends because we all shared similar experiences, getting put on multiple drugs at the same time. Tim, the co-owner of Grunt Style, had been put on several medications not long after he got out of the Marine Corps. Life was falling apart and ended up nearly taking his own life at that time. And so we kind of shared these notes and unfortunately shared some very similar experiences. And the more we talked, the more we started to look at how large the scale of this issue is. So that's kind of the background with the foundation. They're really looking at all kinds of modalities, looking at different ways of really transforming the experience of vets in this country for vets and their families as it relates to mental health, wellness, health, diet, fitness. Triangular Compass is a program of ours that we're expanding out. Basically looking at wellness in the whole body and whole health and whole mind as we go forward, rather than, oh, you're having this symptom, or, oh, you have anxiety, or whatever it may be, looking at this issue from a larger scale and saying, okay, maybe we can do this better. Maybe the results that we're getting aren't that great. And what we can say is that for the past 20 years, we've continued to see veteran suicides continue to increase. We've seen the same story with the civilian population as well. At the same time, we're spending billions and billions of dollars annually on mental health, and the issue keeps on getting worse and worse and worse. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, I love the mission, Derek. I mean, when I was in the military, I was in the National Guard for 6 years, and I talked to a lot of soldiers who were just prescribed SSRIs. It seems like that's what the VA in particular likes to do, man. When somebody comes in with a mental health issue, it's, hey, take this pill, good luck to you, and they send them on their way. And the suicide rate in the military, for veterans in particular, are just extremely high. So I think the Grunt Style Foundation's mission here is absolutely phenomenal. So I do appreciate you getting kind of the rundown on all that. So yeah, thank you for that. And we'll just go ahead and jump into your story here, man. So where does it start, Derek? So you ended up taking finasteride, and kind of what was your story? What happened with all that?
So I kind of had a funny way of entering this conversation in that I had a pretty successful career coming out of the military. Initially served with the AC-130 gunships as an aircraft maintenance guy. Got out after 3 deployments, one right after 9/11. Did my two initial deployments were actually to Uzbekistan, where we now have learned that base is probably one of the most toxic bases U.S. service members have been anywhere in the world in the past 20 to 30 years. So did 6 years, got out, went to community college, did well there, wound up at the University of Michigan, ended up starting an organization called Student Veterans of America, ran that for its first 3 years, helped the lobby for the passage of the Post-9/11 GI Bill back then, And my first job out of there was actually working for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for VA Central Office, building out a new national mental health program for the VA. So that was my initial exposure to these issues, was really working in the programmatic side. And I've become passionate about it because one of our vets, a vet out of UC Berkeley, had taken his own life back in 2009, I believe. And that was a motivator for me to start working on these issues, because I felt like a commander that had lost a troop and didn't have any tools or resources to do anything about it to prevent it from happening again. Absolutely. And so that's what took me to the VA. Did about a year and a half at the VA, expanded out the Veterans Integration to Academic Leadership Initiative, which helps vets access VA mental health care on college campuses across the country. And then went into tech startups. And this is kind of where my story brought us into this conversation today, is that ended up getting prescribed Adderall. Not long after, prescribed Ambien because I couldn't sleep because of Adderall, another couple of medications. Life is starting to fall apart. Was in New York City, spent 5 years in New York City, largely in technology startups, started my own tech company. And the undoing came about midway through my time in New York. 4, 5, 6 drugs at a time for periods of time. And one of those drugs did happen to be finasteride. Left New York, a friend of mine packed me up in U-Haul, hauled me back to Michigan. When I got back to Michigan, the struggles continued, but it was at that time that I went back to the VA, because the VA had actually initially prescribed me the finasteride, and they actually violated VA policy in doing so.
I was going to say,
yeah, they're not allowed to prescribe it for cosmetic issues, and that's what it was. My hair was falling out. I was living in New York. I was vain.
Sure.
It's like, how am I going to find a partner if I don't have any hair in my head? Well, guess what? There's a lot of people out there that have done that. Absolutely. Not the first person in this world to lose their hair. Yep. And so it got prescribed finasteride, but I got back to Michigan. At this point, I'm starting to have word salads. I'm having a tough time putting coherent thoughts together. Yeah. And that was probably one of the scarier periods, because I all along, one of the things that I depended on was my abilities to think and to problem solve.
Right.
And that's what enabled me to do a lot of the work that I've done.
Right.
And losing my faculties was probably one of the most distressing parts of my life, was not being able to stitch sentences together and then put words together. And so when I got back to Ann Arbor VA, the psychiatrists and doctors there, they refused to give me a refill because they recognized that I shouldn't have been prescribed that drug in the first place.
Right.
The psychiatrist noted there had been known issues with finasteride, and he suspected that may have been playing a role in my cognitive issues. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of froggy trying to figure out which medications caused what.
Right.
Because immediately when I came off of finasteride, I was immediately put on Zoloft. And so, and that medication, I also had a very bad reaction to. Ended up actually taking a year to get off of Zoloft. That was also probably the more excruciating year, was that withdrawal. But it was our conversation when we first started talking. I watched your video on moral medicine, realized that Mark and I shared a little bit of a similar story here, and that this medication, I think it played a role in a lot of issues that you and I have had. And I don't think I'd fully understood it, identified it in my story here. So
right, and it's hard to make that link too, because you're not told that finasteride can cause these cognitive issues, right? I mean, for me, the first thing I noticed was that I was jumbling up words. I couldn't think properly. I had this brain fog that was persistent, and even to this day, 2 years off, I still deal with this. It's very difficult for me to speak. It's very difficult for me to articulate myself, and it's horrendous, man. I mean, to lose that's a big part of yourself right there, obviously. So, I guess my question is, how long did you take finasteride for then?
Probably a year and a half, somewhere in there.
Okay, and you came off and you were immediately prescribed, I think, Zoloft, you said?
Yeah, at that point I was on Adderall, Ambien, gabapentin, Zoloft, and I just came off of the finasteride. It was at that time that kind of I started to realize, wait a minute, how many medications am I on?
Right.
And that's when I started realizing, like, there's some, I think these medications are actually causing a lot of the issues that I've been developing. And so that's kind of how I end up going down this path of advocacy, is realizing if this happened to me, and the more I studied about this issue from books of by Robert Whitaker, wrote Mad in America, Anatomy of an Epidemic. The more I studied, the more I realized, like, I'm actually a crime victim here. Right. And that's a tough thing to admit when you don't think you're somebody that can be the victim of anything.
Yeah.
And sure enough, and the more I studied, the more I learned that these issues are global in scale. Mm-hmm. They're not restricted just to the VA. The VA has largely streamlined Western medicine and mental health care here in the United States, and largely has created it and built it and scaled it. Right. But at the end of the day, we're on the receiving end of poor regulatory system,
right?
And the result of financial influence of drug companies over the way this country and the Western Hemisphere does mental health and cares for people in general. The medical model as a whole, really.
I think it's amazing you're leveraging kind of what you went through in your pain to make a difference in this movement here. And you were prescribed all these medications by the VA specifically, correct?
Initially, no. And initially, it was a civilian doc. That's what kind of got me into the rodeo there. Okay. But 3 years of being prescribed these medications, that was VA. Gotcha. And it should be noted that I've been having meetings with senior leaders at the VA Office of Mental Health, and there's a recognition that there are issues as it relates to informed consent, which is, I think, our biggest thing that we're looking for in all of this, is that if you're going to be prescribed a medication that can cause these severe side effects, you should be aware of it. You should know what to be looking for. Your family should know what to be looking for. So. Right.
And you were given no awareness that any of these things could potentially happen when you were given any of these drugs.
I mean, I don't think anybody can really be prepared for word salads and thought salads.
Yeah, no, you can't be.
I mean, like, they could tell you, like, hey, it can develop some cognitive issues or cognitive functioning and whatnot, but, like, nobody's going to tell you that, like, you're not going to be able to stitch thoughts together.
Right. Yeah. When hearing about it and experiencing it are two completely different things, obviously. I mean, you can't prepare for something this bad, especially when it lasts, in some cases, years at a time. So,
right.
Having said that, I mean, at what point did you start to kind of recover from these damages that you sustained from the medicine you were taking?
Somewhere in 2018. I'd talked to a friend, and from her sharing her experience, it was that moment that I realized, like, wait a minute, how many medications am I on? And when I hit my second hand, I was like,
yeah.
For somebody that's in their 30s, largely healthy, no major health issues to speak of, like, I shouldn't have been on all those medications.
Yeah.
One maybe, but the reality is that we're treating the side effects of other issues. So it was like Adderall, and then you start having anxiety issues, or you can't sleep. Right. Then comes in the ambient anxiety issues come around. Then you got gabapentin. You start having other issues. You start going on as antidepressant. You start having panic attacks and other things. Then you're getting hit with benzos and other meds. Thankfully, I didn't go fully down that rabbit trail, but, like, a lot of people do. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Man, I mean, anytime we have an issue now, this is what the medical system does. They just prescribe. They don't talk about these natural remedies. I mean, trying to get good sleep, going to counseling, working out, taking care of yourself, dieting, whatever it might be, man. It's just always prescription drugs at this point. So let me ask you, Derek, when you went through that period in your life when you were really sick from these medications, I mean, how did that impact you? What was it like? Yeah, the word salad you mentioned, but how did it impact your social life, your friends, your career, everything?
I mean, it all came apart. Everything came apart. Like, I went from coming out of the Air Force, going to the University of Michigan, and co-founding Student Veterans of America, getting recruited by the chief of mental health at the VA to help them build a new national mental health program, and then starting a technology company, to being unemployable and VA's definition homeless, like couch surfing, shitty Airbnb, shitty hotel. Like, that was my story for a bit. And so, like, losing your abilities to care for yourself, to put a roof over your head, that's where I'd never wish to go through these things again. But the experiences that I've got really helped me really have a great deal of empathy and understanding for people who are going through this or have gone through this.
Right.
That whether it's homelessness or whatever it may be, that a lot of people, like they're trying hard. They're trying to put their lives together, and they may be having side effects of a medication or treatment that they're not connecting their issues with. And so that's kind of where we're at, is we really just need to start looking at this and like talking with each other. And that's how these issues are solved, is like,
right.
Mark has this experience and he says, no, enough's enough. Like,
right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's an important point to make. I mean, we got to talk about this, man. We got to go public with these things and discuss these issues. I mean, because you went from being a very, high performing, high speed individual to essentially being homeless, man, and having nothing for a period of your life. I mean, and that's what I see with a lot of guys, when it comes to finasteride in particular, but also PSSD from taking SSRIs. These people go from being these very high performing individuals to losing everything, man. The common denominator is always these medications. They lose their relationships, they lose their careers, they lose their livelihood, their homes. And the impact is just it's tremendous. So I think we really got to come out and just start talking about this more. Derek, that's an amazing story, man. And again, I really appreciate you leveraging all this pain, the suffering you went through to make a difference with this movement. I think the Grunt Style Foundation, it's an incredible mission, and I'm really really happy to help support this any way I can. Before we hop off here, man, do you have any other statements you want to make, or any closing statements you want to make?
I think that the key is I think we as a country, and the veteran community specifically, we need to look at these issues through the lens of our communities. Actually talk to the folks who are struggling, whether it's with depression, whether it's anxiety, whatever it may be, post-traumatic stress. And talk with them and say, hey, what has worked for you and what has not worked for you? Right. And I think the more we talk with these folks, the more we're going to find that this is the worst kept secret in our community, which is the overprescribing of many psychiatric drugs, and drugs like finasteride, that folks are not being given informed consent. They're not being told of the risk profiles of medications they're on. I mean, the issues with PSSD, with SSRIs, the protracted withdrawal, whether folks are having permanent sexual dysfunction, brain fog, like the overlaps between a lot of the psychiatric drugs and finasteride is just fascinating. Right. And I think that we need to start coming together as a community. And it's been great to see, actually, as the Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, DAV, other big national veterans organizations, folks like Save a Warrior in Southern Ohio, some of the programs that they're doing are just fascinating and amazing. But we need to start looking at these alternative modalities and looking at, is the treatment that we're currently providing helping people? Is it hurting people, or is it both? And if it's both, which that is, I believe, the case, we need to start looking at how do we do this more safely? And if it's, whether it's finasteride for hair loss or another cosmetic issue, whether it's antidepressant, whether it's whatever drug it is, no one should be surprised at the side effects that they develop. And the problem is the doctors really aren't aware right now. And until the doctors are read in, retrained, mental health clinicians are retrained. Right. If they don't know the side effects of the medications their patients are on, and they come in exhibiting mania, they're not going to connect it with the drug because they never received training on it. And so that's what we need to be looking at is how do we do this better and safer? Not how do we just not do it at all? It's how do we become smarter about this?
Absolutely. Really well said. And I think that's really one of the purposes behind doing this channel here, is to capture the clinical picture of what's happening to people when they do take these drugs, whether it's an SSRI or finasteride or Accutane, or even some supplements in that case, So, really important that we continue covering this topic. So, well, Derek, hey, man, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see everyone next time.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.